Imagine for a second
Mhm.
that you are locked in this crazy multi-dimensional geostrategic escape room,
Oh, that sounds stressful.
right? And the rules of this room are just brutal. Like, if you move a single chess piece over in the Middle East, an inflation alarm instantly goes off in Toronto.
Which is already a nightmare.
Exactly. And then if you try to, reach up and fix that alarm, a trapdoor just opens up right under a political coalition in Ottawa.
Yeah, and simultaneously, you've got these two separate walls of the room representing entirely different regions of the country, and they just start closing in to crush you.
Yes. Make one wrong move,
Yeah.
and you don't just lose the game, you literally fracture a G7 nation.
Because the pressure in that room is immense, right? The walls are quite literally moving as we speak.
Yeah.
You have these massive global energy shocks colliding directly with domestic political fault lines. It's the ultimate high-stakes puzzle.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking you inside that exact escape room.
It's going to be a wild one.
It really is. So we're looking at this wildly detailed academic paper from the Global Review. It was published by Dr. Novin and Associates in April 2026.
Right.
And it's titled A Bayesian Game Theoretic Analysis of Canadian Grand Strategy 2026 to 2030.
Quite the mouthful.
A bit dense, yeah. But our mission today is to unpack this predictive analysis and figure out how a massive global energy shock is basically threatening to tear Canada apart.
Or potentially transform it into an undisputed energy superpower if they play their cards right.
Exactly. And before we jump in, just a quick tone check for you listening. This paper touches on some highly polarized political figures, both in Canada and the U.S., and deals heavily with, regional separatist movements.
Which is always a sensitive topic.
Very. So our job today is absolutely not to take a political side. We aren't here to cheer or boo for Prime Minister Mark Carney or U.S. President Trump or any of the provincial separatist leaders.
Right. We're strictly here to impartially explore the game theory, right? The macroeconomic data and those geopolitical chess moves the source outlines.
Spot on. So to understand the tension in this room, we have to look at the earthquake that basically just hit the building.
The spark that lit the fuse.
Yeah. It's April 2026, and the Strait of Hormuz has been slammed shut.
Right. So following that U.S. and Israel air campaign in late February, Iran just closed the strait. And, this is completely unprecedented in the post-Cold War era.
It's a massive deal.
Huge. We are talking about the sudden removal of roughly 20% of the global seaborne oil supply.
Wow.
Yeah, that is 10 million barrels a day, completely bottlenecked. By April, West Texas Intermediate Crude WTI shot past $115.42 a barrel.
And the fallout isn't just, everyday people paying more at the gas pump.
No, not at all.
The source points out this is a severe humanitarian and food security crisis. Gulf states depend on that strait for over 80% of their caloric import.
Which is terrifying when shipping is entirely disrupted.
Right. And with attacks on desalination plants, too, the paper highlights these massive food price spikes in the Gulf, like up to 120%. The entire global logistics system is in sheer panic.
But then you have Canada's structural position right in the middle of all this panic, and it's just a total paradox.
Yeah, I was trying to think of how to visualize this for you, and it's kind of like, imagine owning a gold mine, right?
Okay.
But you're forced to buy all of your groceries at a luxury boutique where the prices double every single week.
That is exactly it. It's this massive macroeconomic contradiction tearing the country's economy in two different directions.
Right, because on one hand, Canada is a net energy exporter. Alberta's just sitting there producing over 3.3 million barrels a day of oil sands crude.
And at over $115 a barrel, the province is raking in cash.
The profitability is astronomical.
Yeah, but the maritime disruption that makes that oil so valuable is simultaneously driving up the cost of imported manufactured goods, right?
Right, because everything relies on shipping.
Exactly. Jet fuel costs have doubled. Fertilizer costs are spiking. So while Alberta gets this massive windfall, the rest of Canada, especially Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces, they're facing crippling import cost inflation.
They're essentially caught in a stagflation trap.
A brutal one, yeah. And this brings us right to the desk of the Prime Minister,
Mark Carney, who, according to the paper, came into power with a Liberal minority but just secured a working majority through 5 highly controversial floor crossings.
Right. And one of the most notable being Conservative MP Marilyn Gladu.
From Sarnia-Lambton, right?
Yes. And that specific defection is crucial because her riding is the absolute heart of Canada's petrochemical refining and cross-border trade.
Wow. Okay, so that's a huge signal.
Exactly. When a politician from that specific region crosses the aisle, it signals a massive shift in how the government is operating. The Carney government has completely pivoted away from the culturally focused policies of the previous era,
Right, the paper says he's now using a technocratic macroprudential risk management approach,
which is an incredibly dry academic way of saying,
saying he stopped talking like a politician trying to win hearts and started talking like a central banker trying to prevent a systemic collapse.
precisely, everything is framed around institutional resilience now. But the math of his political coalition is just brutal.
Because his core voter base in Ontario and Quebec is bearing the absolute brunt of the inflation.
Right, while the massive financial windfall from the crisis is geographically isolated in Alberta.
And that economic imbalance translates directly into domestic constitutional stress. Because, I mean, if one region is booming while the center is suffocating, the center's going to look for ways to tap into that boom.
Which immediately triggers historical grievances. The paper actually describes this pressure as a pincer movement on Canadian federalism.
A pincer movement. So pressure from both sides. Let's look at the West first.
Okay, so in Alberta, you have this movement called Stay Free Alberta. They launched a petition drive and easily cleared the 177,732 signatures needed to legally force a separation referendum by May 2026.
Wait, May 2026? That's right around the corner in this timeline.
It is. But the path to actually holding that vote isn't clear.
Yeah.
The Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation stepped in and filed an injunction to stop the petition entirely.
Citing treaty rights.
Yes, which acts as a profound constitutional check on any secession process. But, and this is key, the source notes they are also explicitly warning about foreign interference in the separatist movement.
Okay, we'll definitely come back to that foreign interference part.
Yeah.
But what about the other arm of the pincer? Quebec.
Right, so Premier François Legault resigned. And in that vacuum, the Parti Québécois, led by Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, is just surging in the polls.
And he's publicly committed to holding a sovereignty referendum within his first mandate, potentially by 2030.
It's a dual threat to the very fabric of the nation.
Okay, but I want to push back on the severity of this threat for a second. Because if you look at the raw data in the paper, it says active support for independence in Alberta is actually only hovering between 20 and 30%. And in Quebec, 54% of voters actively oppose sovereignty. So if the clear majority of people in both provinces don't actually want to leave, why is Ottawa treating this like an existential five-alarm crisis? Isn't it just political theater?
Well, you're looking at the baseline domestic numbers, but that ignores the international dimension.
The foreign interference the First Nations mentioned.
Exactly. The threat isn't just domestic anymore. The paper emphasizes that U.S. politicians, specifically under the Trump-Essig administration, are openly expressing sympathy and endorsement for Alberta separation.
Wait, really? Why would the U.S. care if Alberta separates?
Because an independent, landlocked Alberta would be entirely dependent on the U.S. for export access.
Oh, I see.
U.S. strategic interests view an independent Alberta as a way to secure direct, unimpeded access to over 3 million barrels of oil a day.
Without ever having to negotiate with Ottawa or deal with federal environmental regulations.
Exactly. They just want a direct pipeline to the gas station. And this American involvement taps into a very deep historical trauma in Western Canada, the ghost of the 1980 National Energy Program, or the NEP.
Right, when Pierre Trudeau's government responded to a global oil shock by imposing price controls.
Yes, they essentially capped the price of Alberta's oil below world market rates to subsidize cheap energy for Ontario and Quebec. It transferred billions out of Alberta and left a generational wound.
So any move the current government makes today feels like a repeat of 1980 to Western voters.
Exactly. So even if only, say, 25% of Albertans want to secede, when a foreign superpower starts using that minority movement as a wedge issue, it paralyzes the nation's ability to govern itself.
Okay, so the inflation crisis is squeezing the center, Western alienation is hitting historic highs, Quebec nationalism is surging, and the U.S. is potentially fanning the flames just to get cheaper oil.
It's a mess.
How does Ottawa even break out of this? They can't just ask everyone to calm down.
No, they have to look outward. They have to use the global crisis as leverage to fundamentally change their negotiating position with the United States.
And the primary battlefield for this is this CUSMA trade agreement review scheduled for July 2026, right?
Yes. The Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. The U.S. administration wants to play hardball, keep tariffs on steel and aluminum. But suddenly, because Hormuz is closed, Canada has an incredibly strong hand.
Because the definition of North American national security shifted overnight.
Exactly. Before the crisis, the U.S. treated Canada as a convenient secondary supplier. Now, North American energy independence is an acute necessity.
The U.S. Gulf Coast refineries desperately need Canada's heavy crude.
They do. Those refineries are literally built and chemically configured to process thick, sludgy, heavy crude. Trying to replace Canadian supply with Venezuelan or Mexican crude in this chaotic environment would be a logistical nightmare.
It would take years to reconfigure.
Years. And it isn't just oil on the table, it's critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements.
Which are the essential building blocks of the modern defense sector, right? And clean energy tech.
Exactly. The U.S. needs these materials to counter China's dominance. So Canada is walking into that July 2026 meeting demanding what the paper calls critical mineral preference status.
Oh, meaning they want structural guarantees that Canadian minerals get preferential treatment in U.S. defense procurement.
You got it. But having leverage in a trade negotiation isn't enough. You need an operational strategy that fundamentally alters your economic dependence. You need options.
Which brings us to the $40 billion Arctic and Northern infrastructure investment.
Yes.
This might be my favorite part of the entire analysis. To put this in video game terms for you listening, imagine you're playing a level where the main path is completely blocked by a troll.
And the troll is U.S. pipeline congestion and political leverage.
Right. Instead of fighting the troll, you spend all your resources building a secret back door. The Carney government announces this massive plan to build deep-water Arctic ports and roads like the Grays Bay Road.
Connecting the mineral-rich slave geological province directly to the ocean?
Yes. Canada is creating a second export corridor. They can load oil and minerals onto ships and send them directly to Europe in the Indo-Pacific without ever touching U.S. soil.
The brilliance of this backdoor strategy is that it achieves multiple geopolitical goals simultaneously. It isn't just an economic corridor, it's a defense strategy.
Because of the NATO targets.
Exactly. For years, the U.S. has been demanding that Canada hit its NATO defense spending targets for burden sharing. Well, this massive $40 billion northern infrastructure build-out includes dual-use civilian and military logistical hubs.
Oh, wow.
So it counts toward defense spending, satisfying Washington's demands.
While simultaneously asserting legal sovereignty over the Northwest Passage, which the U.S. claims doesn't even belong to Canada.
Right. Under international law, sovereignty isn't just drawing a line on a map. It's a function of effective occupation and control.
And the U.S. claims it's an international strait open to everyone, but Canada claims it as internal sovereign waters.
Exactly. By physically building these ports and operating military hubs in the region, Canada is occupying the space. They're turning a historic vulnerability into an undeniable geopolitical asset.
Okay, so we've laid out the entire game board. We have the Hormuz shock, the domestic pincer movement threatening to split the country, and Canada's aggressive CUSMA and Arctic leverage plays.
The pieces are all in motion.
Right. Now we have to figure out how this all actually ends. And this is where the source gets intensely mathematical, using Bayesian forecasting models for 2026 to 2030.
Bayesian forecasting is essentially a way of predicting the future by constantly updating your beliefs as new evidence arrives.
Okay, can you give us an example of how that works in this specific scenario?
Sure, think of it as a living, breathing mathematical organism. If a poll comes out tomorrow showing Quebec separatist support dropped by 2%, the model ingests that data and instantly recalculates the overall odds of Canada fracturing.
So maybe dropping it from 12% down to 9%.
Exactly. Or if an oil pipeline gets delayed, the model ingests that and raises the probability of Western alienation.
Fascinating. And based on all current data, the paper runs the math to identify 4 specific scenarios for how this geopolitical escape room resolves.
Right, let's walk through them.
So scenario 1 is continental integration. They give this a 28% probability. This is basically the happy pass, right?
Yeah, the Hormuz crisis resolves smoothly, COSMA is successfully renegotiated with an energy annex, and the separatist movements in both provinces just fizzle out after voters reject the chaos.
Sounds nice, but 28% isn't huge.
Right, because it requires a lot of independent variables to go right simultaneously, which is why the model identifies scenario 2 as the most likely outcome, the modal scenario at 38%. They call it Managed fragmentation.
Managed fragmentation. That sounds like a really polite academic way of saying limping along.
It's the historical Canadian default, honestly, a world of partial accommodations. The global crisis persists, oil prices stay high, but the referendums are delayed through legal challenges and political maneuvering.
And the cornerstone of this scenario is the federal government negotiating something called a new federalism accord.
Yes, to relieve the pressure. We'll dig into that accord in a second.
Yeah, let's cover the other two scenarios first. Scenario 3 is the strategic pivot. The model gives this a 22% chance.
Right. This happens if Hormuz stays closed long term. Canada goes all in on that video game backdoor in the Arctic,
Fully pivoting away from relying on the United States.
accelerating liquefied natural gas and Arctic exports straight to Europe and the Indo-Pacific. The economic boom from this is so undeniable that it naturally deflates the separatist argument.
Which leaves scenario 4, constitutional crisis. The ultimate tail risk, perfect storm. The U.S. tears up the trade agreement, the global economy crashes, and both Alberta and Quebec simultaneously hold and win separation referendums.
And the model puts this at a 12% probability.
Okay, I have to stop you there, 12%. If my weather app told me there was a 12% chance it was going to rain, I wouldn't even grab an umbrella on my way out the door. Should the average citizen, or the prime minister for that matter, really be treating a 1 in 10 chance of disaster as a crisis?
Well, in daily life, 12% is trivial. But in geopolitical risk management, a 12% chance of your country literally dissolving is a 5-alarm fire.
Wow, okay, put that way.
The paper uses the concept of expected disutility. You multiply the probability of the event by the sheer magnitude of the harm.
Right, and the harm here is the absolute destruction of the Canadian state, the collapse of the currency.
Exactly. So a 12% probability demands massive, immediate preventative action. You don't just hope it doesn't rain, you rebuild the entire roof.
So what is the blueprint for rebuilding the roof? How does the paper suggest Ottawa actually prevent that 12% scenario?
It all comes back to that new federalism accord we mentioned in the managed fragmentation scenario.
Right, the 38% scenario.
Yeah. The critical insight from the paper is that you cannot treat Alberta and Quebec as having the same problem.
Even though they are both actively threatening to leave.
Correct. Alberta's grievances are fundamentally economic and structural. They're angry about resource management and federal environmental regulations capping their economic potential.
Okay, and Quebec.
Quebec's grievances are fundamentally cultural and existential. They're concerned with protecting their language and having control over immigration to preserve their distinct social model.
So you have to solve them simultaneously, but you solve them differently.
Exactly. The paper suggests an asymmetrical devolution of power.
Meaning?
To translate that into plain terms, Ottawa essentially breaks the standard rules of federalism to give specific provinces special powers that the others don't get.
Oh, I see.
You grant Alberta a highly streamlined authority over their own resource management, giving them the freedom to maximize their energy exports without federal interference.
At the exact same time.
You grant Quebec enhanced control over their immigration targets and judicial appointments. Because the root causes of their alienation are entirely different, you can appease both provinces without contradicting yourself.
Wow. So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now?
It's a lot to take in.
It is. It's incredibly easy to look at global supply chain blockades, Bayesian probability models, and Arctic deepwater ports as these abstract concepts that just live in dense academic papers.
Right. Far removed from daily life.
Exactly. But the reality of this analysis is that the price of the food in your grocery store, the purchasing power of your paycheck, and the literal physical borders of your country are currently being actively negotiated in this invisible geopolitical chess match. Every single time a ship is blocked in the Middle East, a pressure valve pops in North America.
And if we look just slightly beyond the core mathematical models of this paper, there is a profound, almost uncomfortable paradox sitting right at the heart of this entire strategy.
What's that?
Think about the Arctic bypass we discussed. Canada's ultimate geopolitical trump card, the Northwest Passage, only becomes viable as a year-round commercial shipping route because of climate change.
Oh, wow.
The very global warming that threatens ecological stability worldwide is the exact mechanism melting the sea ice. It's potentially turning Canada's northern coast into the most vital and fiercely contested commercial shipping route of the 21st century.
That is wild to think about.
Really makes you wonder, Are we truly prepared for the day the Arctic becomes the new center of the world?
We started this deep dive locked in a geostrategic escape room, but it turns out the way out might just be through a door we didn't even know was defrosting.
Very well put.
Thanks for exploring these incredible insights with us today, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.